How do you write an Olympic weightlifting program? Should you stomp or slide your feet in the snatch and clean and jerk? And how can you incorporate bench press into your weightlifting training? In episode 21 of the Last Step Best Step podcast, Coach Calvin and I dive deep answering these questions and more. If you want your question answered on next week's episode, then make sure to subscribe to the channel.
Welcome back to the Last Step Best Step podcast. I'm Coach Brian. I'm the owner of Big Ben Strength. I've been teaching Olympic lifting for the last 11 years now.
What's up? This is Coach Calvin. I am current captain of Lindenwood University Weightlifting, as well as the recording of this podcast, national university champion now individually. So
let's go.
I've also been coaching through Big Ben Strength for over a year now.
And today, guys, we're going to be answering some questions that you guys sent in to us, starting with question number 1. Any tips on writing an Olympic weightlifting program? So this is a pretty broad question, so there's a lot that we're going to cover here. We'll probably spend a little bit of time on this, but if you guys are curious about programming, or maybe you are a new coach and you're trying to figure out how to do this, or maybe you're just trying to figure this out for yourself, hopefully this will be of some help. So whenever I'm writing a weightlifting program, this is the order that I do things in. This is how I get organized, because otherwise it can be pretty overwhelming. So the first thing that we're going to do is figure out what our timeline is going to be. The second thing that we're going to do is figure out what our exercise selection is going to be. The third thing is figuring out our training split, what our weekly training split is. And then the fourth thing that we're going to do is figure out the phases of training. Now, all of these kind of blend in together a little bit, but I like to do it in this order for me. That's just what works best for me. So when it comes to coming up with a timeline, there's a lot that goes into that. First, we need to figure out how many weeks do we have. So if you are looking for a competition coming up, we need to figure out how many weeks are out from that competition are you. Or if you just don't have a particular timeline, then that means that maybe we could do a little bit of a longer training block. Along with that, we've got to figure out how many phases we're going to do. So I've done some programs where we'll do 2 4-week blocks. I've done some programs where we'll do 3. I've done some programs where we do 4 4-week blocks. And then sometimes we'll have a 2-week taper after that for a competition or something. So figuring out the phases is important, and then figuring out how many days a week you're going to train. What are your thoughts on this? Any tips for people here?
Yeah, so there's a few terms that are used in strength and conditioning to kind of organize our thoughts here. The first big one is macro cycle. So macro means big. This is the largest, kind of way you can think about your training. It is basically just a year. It's just a year. Most people, organize like, maybe my big meet is going to be the national championships. That's when I want to do really well, is in the summer nationals for weightlifting. So after Summer Nationals, your training would probably look a lot different than directly before Summer Nationals.
It should.
So that would be when your kind of calendar year of training starts, is directly after Nationals. So for us at Lindenwood, at a university program, that meet is University Nationals. It just happened for us. It's about a week ago. And now we're going to get into some pretty intense volume training that isn't going to be the best in the moment for having the highest snatch and clean and jerk, like in a month or two, but is really going to potentiate more lifts later on. Anyways, what that's kind of called, like a volume cycle, that's the next block, which is called a mesocycle. So this is like the next step down of how you organize your training. Usually these blocks are, between 8 to 12 weeks long. And they kind of have a focus attached with them. So whether it's a volume or clean deadlift strength focus, back squat focus, you might attack different things different ways. Maybe you have a snatch focused mesocycle and then a clean and jerk focused mesocycle. There's a lot of different ways you could do it in weightlifting. It's just about picking whichever one kind of attacks your personal needs as an athlete best. Kind of what we look like. With the mesocycle, you want to start less specific and get more specific throughout that training year. So clean deadlift is a lot less specific to the Olympic lifts than front squat is. So we probably put front squat near the end of the training year calendar, with clean deadlift focus block, near the beginning. Other than that, there's also a microcycle, which is just 1 week of training. Now, that comes down to a lot of exercise selection. Why don't you expand on that a little bit, Brian?
Yeah, so with choosing exercises, this is like when you really start getting into figuring out what the program is going to be. And this is kind of my favorite part of writing training programs. So a general rule of thumb that I've found is that when you have less days available per week to train, you have to be way more specific with the movements that you're going to do. Specific meaning closer to doing the snatch and clean and jerk. So an example of this would be like a hip snatch is a lot less specific to the snatch than a snatch is, right? Or, maybe some sort of 3-pause complex would be less specific than just a normal snatch. So when we say specificity, that's what we mean. But if you have more days a week to train, then you have the ability to have more variations in your training. So generally what I'll say is, like, if we're training 3 days a week, we probably just need to focus on largely just doing snatch, clean and jerk, and then the main squat movement, squats and pulls. So front squat, back squat, snatch, pull, clean pull. In most training programs, I generally try and do a full snatch and a full clean and jerk each twice a week. And then I also try to do front squat, back squat, snatch, pull, clean pull each once a week. So from there, you already have like the bulk of your exercises largely chosen. If you have more days per week to work with, then you can add in some more specific variations or complexes to work on your specific technique weak points. And you can do these in any number of ways. So one example of that is on Wednesdays in most of our programs, we typically will do powers. But if I'm writing for an individual, then we may, instead of do powers on that day, we may do some sort of complex, or we may do some variation that is going to help a lifter work on a specific weak point of theirs. An example of that could be, I've got an athlete who is just leaning back a little too hard in their snatches. So we're going to try using no contact snatches as a variation to help them learn how to kind of connect their legs into their arms pretty smoothly. So that's one example of that. You could do... You could also take variations or complexes and use them as a movement primer if you have less days per week, but you still want to get some specific technique work in. So let's say you only have 3 days a week. You're snatch and clean and jerk on Monday. You're doing snatch and clean and jerk on Friday. Maybe before you start your snatches, you could do those same no contact snatches as you're warming up to your first working weight on snatch for the day. That is a good way to sneak in some extra variations and keep training a little bit more interesting without having to add in or make the session all that longer. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, absolutely. Primers are a huge thing I use. Even if you are doing 5 days a week of training,
Yeah.
I'll put primers in for everybody. As it's a big reminder to be intentional, outside of just programming, the boring programming stuff, how you're actually training probably makes a lot bigger difference than just what the sets and reps and exercise selection is. So I'd take the person snatching once a week being super intentional over the person doing 3 times a week snatching, but just going through the motions, not even thinking about the movement. So that primer kind of focuses, especially as a coach, if you're putting that in for your athlete, reminds them, oh yeah, I got to do this because I have to focus on this in my lift.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, anybody needs that extra little reminder a lot of the times.
Absolutely. So that's kind of how we go through with figuring out what main exercise we're going to do. There's also accessory work to keep in mind here. So accessory work, we've done more podcasts about that, and I'll link those down in the description below. But generally, we are looking at choosing exercises that are either more supplementary or complementary. So supplementary would be exercises that fill a gap that normal weightlifting training doesn't hit. So an example of that could be, we tend to be a very up and down sport. We move weights up and down pretty well, but we don't really do a whole lot of pushing forward or pulling back, things like that. So, supplementary exercise could be dumbbell rows because we don't really do any back work in weightlifting. Another example of that could be hamstring curls, an isolation movement that targets the hamstrings without also targeting the lower back and glutes. So that's another example of a supplementary. Complementary could be a squatting exercise or a pressing exercise. So maybe Bulgarian split squats, they're fairly complementary to normal weightlifting training, or some sort of dumbbell shoulder press. So those are kind of how we categorize accessory exercises. One thing that you love to talk about is that it's generally a good idea to be a little fatigued everywhere all the time rather than specifically sore in one spot once or twice a week. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people come from maybe just a general training background, doing bodybuilding, where they have a push day, a leg day, an arm day. This kind of training really doesn't lend itself to improving your Olympic lifts at all, because if your arms are so sore that like holding the rack position just hurts, like or you can barely even do it because you're tightened up from being sore, you're not going to be able to get quality work in on the Olympic lifts. So same thing, if you just destroy your legs one day, you're not going to be able to train a leg movement for another 3 or 4 days. When it comes to Olympic lifting, the goal is increased like neural efficiency with those movements. Same with the strength of, that's just what building strength is at a certain point, is your brain works better with your body to produce force. With the Olympic lifts, it's a lot more about producing that force in a very specific, very coordinated way that leads to, the bar going in the right, direction with the right speed. There's a lot of timing that goes into that. That's why it takes so long for people to get the good technique in the Olympic lifts. Most people, it's like 5 or 6 years in, they finally reach like a sort of peak of their technique, like where it kind of holds there throughout the rest of their career if they keep going. But anyways, you're not able to train things often enough if you're destroying them once a week in your accessory work. So, if you did 4 exercises for quads after your clean and jerks, you're not going to be able to do a quality clean and jerk for another 4 days. So it's just really, you want to do one exercise maybe 4 days a week for your quads. And you're not going to failure like crazy. You're not doing like drop sets or anything. Like, you're getting that stimulus, but not enough to hurt you the next day you come into the gym.
Right, absolutely. So that that is just a good rule of thumb when it comes to choosing your accessory exercise. And you probably don't need it quite as many as you think. I usually try and shoot for 2 to 3. And a good way to do that, make sure that you're a little fatigued everywhere all the time. So choose one upper body exercise, one lower body exercise, and one core exercise every day. So that you're just getting a little bit of a full body stimulus on the accessories every single session. That's not going to leave you wrecked. And I'll say generally, I would try and prioritize posterior chain exercises a little bit more just because normal training tends to work the anterior chain, the front of the body, a lot more. So generally posterior chain, if you're going to choose, maybe it's a 2-to-1 ratio or something like that, where you're just doing one extra day of posterior chain work. Or one extra exercise there than you would on anterior chain. So that's how we kind of choose our exercise selection for the main exercises, variations, and then some accessory work. And the next step is figuring out the training split for each phase of training. Generally, I'll say that I will use the same split for a full training cycle. Almost very rarely am I going to really shake that up. So that's just a personal preference of mine. You're welcome to try it out and do different ways if you want to. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys 2 sample splits for a 3-day, a 4-day, and a 5-day-a-week training program. So the 3-day split that we can start with is what we use on the OlyStrong 3-day team. That's a high volume Olympic lifts and back squat day on Monday. So we're going to do a lot more reps of Olympic lifts, both snatch and clean and jerk on Monday. And then we'll have our back squats there. Wednesday, I like to do powers and push presses. And then on Friday, we'll do our heaviest Olympic lifting day and front squats. And typically, we're going to do, if we're squatting twice a week, I like to do back squat and front squat, same exact rep scheme and loading percentage. But it really depends on if one is a bigger weak point for you or not. So that's one training split that you can use. Obviously, we've got pulls, we've got accessories in there. I'm not going to go into all that just because we have a lot to get through here. The other 3-day split that you could use is one that I've got for somebody who doesn't have quite enough time to do the full OlyStrong 3-day program. And that's clean and jerk volume and squats and back squats on Monday. Then on Wednesday, we do our snatch volume and pulls and push presses. And then on Friday, we do a heavy snatch and clean and jerk, and then a squat or a pull on Friday. So that's a good way to do that. And I just came to that split because I found that if you do your clean and jerk volume and squats on Wednesday before you have your heavy total day, it usually kind of wrecks that heavy total day. So I wouldn't recommend that. But those are 2 3-day splits that you guys can try. A 4-day split that you can use, and this is kind of my preferred way to train for a lot of people, is Monday, high volume Olympic lifts and pulls. And then Tuesday, we're going to do what's called skills and strength. So I like to do one lighter Olympic lift, usually a technique variation, a primer of some kind, something not all that hard to get through. And I'm going to usually cap it around 3 to 5 sets of about 3 to 5 reps. It can be a little bit less depending on the exercise. So in the team program right now, we're doing tempo snatch and tempo clean as our movement primer for this skills day. And then the strength work is just going to be our traditional strength stuff. So we'll do push press and back squat as the 2 main exercises here, and then have some accessory work after that. We'll rest on Wednesday and Thursday, and then Friday we're going to do our heavy snatch and pulls, and then Saturday we are going to do our heavy clean and jerk and squat. I'm generally a fan of going heavy on the lifts about once a week, but heavy is very relative for the phase of training that we're in. So that is one option for a 4-day training split. Another option we could do, Monday we do snatch volume and pulls. Tuesday we're going to do clean and jerk volume and squats. We'll rest Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday we do heavy snatch and pull, and Saturday we do heavy clean and jerk and squat. So that's a good 4-day-a-week split for you. And then finally, the 5-day-a-week split. This is the one that we use for the 5-day OlyStrong team program. We're going to do high volume Olympic lifts and pulls on Monday. On Tuesday, we're going to do a light technique exercise before getting into the main portion of the workout, strength work, push press back squat, something like that. The other skills and strength day will usually flip-flop that and do strict press and front squat. Wednesdays is moderate powers. Not always heavy unless we're in a phase of training where we're trying to PR our powers, like we are in the team program right now. Friday, heavy Olympic lifts, so building up to a heavy top set, 1 to 3 reps for the snatch and the clean and jerk. And then Saturday, we're going to do a light technique exercise for either the clean or the jerk before getting into the strength work, strict presses, and front squats. So that's one 5-day split that you can use. Another option here would be Monday, snatch volume and pulls. Tuesday, clean and jerk volume and squat. Wednesday, powers and pressing. Friday, heavy snatch and pulls. And Saturday, heavy clean and jerk and squat. So as you can see, the split is generally pretty similar from the 3-day to 4-day to 5-day. We just add in a little bit of extra, and we can spread those exercises out to have either more volume or just more energy for those exercises. But it's not significantly more work to go from 3 days to 4 days to 5 days. All right, I know that was a whole lot of training splits there. Let's go ahead and get into your training split. We've got an off-season one that you like to do. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, this is what I'm doing probably most of the year. Mondays and Fridays are going to be pushing the main movements, the snatch or the clean and jerk, but a lot of the times we're doing just one of them. The reason for this is to focus on quality in that single movement, really hone in, make that the snatch day on Monday. So I don't love doing total days year round, just because I don't think it's needed, and I think you can get a lot of quality work in doing just snatch on a single day or just clean and jerk on a single day. So that's usually Monday or Friday. And then there will be kind of variations on the other days. Now, Saturday is usually a weakness day. That ends up being jerks for me a lot of the time, as well as strength movement. Maybe pushing an AMRAP on a strength movement where you might not do that on the other days in the week. So that leaves us with another 2 days, a Tuesday and a Thursday or Wednesday, that are going to be filled in by kind of clean and jerk or snatch complexes. And what we like to do is maybe start out with a 3-part complex, like snatch, hips, or power snatch plus hip snatch plus snatch balance. And then working up, taking away one of those movements as it gets harder and harder until you end up just pushing, for instance, the snatch balance in the very end of it. But you got in quality work at each type of movement, pushing it to whatever RPE maybe or percentage you want to push it to on each of those movements. Allows you to get in a lot of quality work at each level of those variations. But yeah, that's a pretty simple way of organizing it. Squats once a week, front squats once a week, and clean deadlift once a week. Strict press and bench press each once a week in there as well. But yeah, after you kind of figure out how you're gonna throw your exercises onto each of those days, we kind of go into thinking of the bigger picture organization of how you're gonna do that in that single 9-week block. So for instance, this is like what you think of like your training phases, right? So in that single 9-week block, maybe we're gonna do 3 weeks of 5s, 3 weeks of 3s, and then 3 weeks of 1s or 2s. This is my bread and butter when it comes to programming for athletes. 5-3-1, that's a book I would recommend reading if you are a coach, especially. It's a great way of organizing training. So 5s, you're getting in enough volume to kind of practice the movement a lot and accumulate that volume. 3s, you're getting a little more specific, and 1s, you're working that max strength with low volume, high intensity. It works super well for getting people stronger. So these are kind of like regular, kind of during the year, perhaps after you do maybe a 8 week or 12-week volume phase, true volume phase, you go into a strength phase, kind of like this with a 5-3-1 layout. That's kind of what you do a lot too, right, Brian?
Yeah, typically what I like to do lately, this has been my favorite way to approach this. So just do 4-week blocks for a 12-week training cycle. The first 4 weeks, we're just going to do triples on competition lifts and then 5s on the strength lifts. Then we'll do 4-week block of doubles on the competition lifts and then triples on the strength lifts. And then the final 4-week block, the peaking phase, we'll do singles on the competition lifts and then 1 to 2 reps on the strength lifts. So that has worked pretty well for me for a long time. That's the split that we use in the Welcome to Hell program, and that's the one we're doing in Welcome to Hell 2.0, which we're running right now on the OlyStrong team. So that tends to work pretty well for me. But you can take a program like this and then before that tack on an 8-week volume phase, like you were talking about. How would somebody do something like that?
Yeah, so essentially starting out the training year, you do that volume phase with 10s, maybe even 10s and then 8s. So maybe 4 weeks of 10s, 4 weeks of 8s before you get into doing those 5s. We'll even do 3 weeks or 4 weeks of 10s, 4 weeks of 8s, 4 weeks of 6s before doing that strength phase. It all depends on that athlete's needs. Like, is this athlete at a really high level? Are they back squatting 240 kilos? Okay, you probably don't need a 3-4 month volume block. They need to work on Olympic lifts and maintaining that strength really well. So the more advanced you get, the less chunked out your training kind of gets, I would say. So you'll do something that is pretty highly triphasic with triphasic like volume, strength, peak.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be very clearly different with like a beginner, I'd say. Whereas the more advanced you get, you're kind of doing a little bit of everything at once because you got another meet in 2 months that you got to go perform at. Maybe you're competing at national meets 3 times a year or trying to qualify for international teams. So you don't have 3 months to go do a volume program where a beginner does.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can be really helpful for that advanced athlete to do maybe 2 or 3 weeks of 10s or 8s, but then they're probably sprinkling in volume throughout their year in different ways, like AMRAP sets, like EMOMs, like accessory work that they're pushing a little harder after their Olympic lifts, so they can still get in that quality Olympic lifting. At the end of the day, that's the sport, Olympic lifting. But it can be super helpful for beginners or intermediate lifters who've never even done a volume phase.
For sure.
Unlock a ton more kilos in their strength lifts, most likely.
And when you guys are doing your volume phase for the strength lifts where you're doing your 10s, 8s, 6s, What are you guys doing with your Olympic lifts in that phase? What's the focus there?
That's when the frequency is pretty low. Like it's like full snatch once a week plus a snatch complex once a week. Clean and jerk, once a week plus clean and jerk complex, and then you got the weakness movement on the other day. So, I mean, you might do EMOMs. That might be the more advanced version. Would be like a 10-minute EMOM, where you can kind of push that a little heavier, say, than doing sets of 4 on a snatch. But get if you're doing EMOM doubles, 10-minute EMOM doubles, that'd be 20 reps. It'd be similar to doing like 5 sets of 4 at whatever weight that might be. But you're probably at a higher average weight on that 10-minute EMOM doubles than you are with 5 sets of 4. So that's kind of how we do that.
That makes sense. Cool. Okay. Well, I think we kind of fully covered it. So just to recap that, when you're writing an Olympic weightlifting program, this is how we break it down. First, we're going to figure out the timeline. How many weeks, how many phases, what's the focus of each phase, and how many days. Then we're going to figure out our exercise selection. How many days a week can we train and keep it realistic, right? It's better to err on the side of being a little bit more conservative there than to try and overdo it and not be able to make all the days. Choose generally it's good to do a full snatch and full clean and jerk 1 to 2 times a week. I try to shoot for 2 times a week most of the time, and then front squat, back squat, snatch pull, clean pull each once a week, and then you can fill in the gaps if you have available space for it with variations, complexes, or even primers to work on your specific technique weak points. And then accessories, we're generally trying to do 1 upper, lower, and core exercise every session, prioritizing the posterior chain a little bit more. And then we go into and figure out what training split that we're going to do when we walk through a whole bunch of them there. So feel free to go back and write those down if you need to, and then figure out how many phases of training and what your phases of training are going to look like. And feel free to use the ones that we discussed already. So hopefully that helps you guys kind of figure out how to write your own training program or how to start writing training programs for other people. But if you guys ever have questions specifically about programming, leave them in the comments so that we can help make sure that we're helping you specifically with it.
Up next, we talk about how to incorporate bench press into your weightlifting programming. But first, I wanted to let you know about the OlyStrong team. The OlyStrong team is my flagship coaching program. You'll get access to your choice of 3 or 5 days a week of training, complete with demo videos, exercise notes, and technique tips, daily video feedback on your lifts. Just post your videos into the session notes or in our Discord group, and unlimited coach messaging to ask as many questions as you like, such as how do I modify my workout because I'm traveling this week? You'll get all of this for $19 to $29 a month, and you can try a free week at the link in the description below. All right, back to the show.
Question number 2. I know most weightlifters don't bench press, but I like it. What's the best way to incorporate a bench press into my training without it getting in the way of my weightlifting? Calvin, why don't most weightlifters bench?
A lot of weightlifters avoid bench pressing, specifically because of like mobility. They think at least that it'll decrease their mobility, and there's probably certainly a way you could do bench press in which it would cause that effect. For instance, benching like 3 times a week, super heavy, just like a lot of volume. It's probably, you're going to walk in the gym, kind of what we talked about on question 1 with accessory movements. If you go really hard on something like bench press, if you're taking it to failure one day, you're probably coming in the gym the next day not able to get in the best snatch position,
right,
as quickly as possible. So that's the reason a lot of people avoid it. But with just some careful planning and discipline about weight selection and intensity, you can implement bench press pretty much with no problem. Kind of what would that look like, you think?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I think just once a week you can absolutely incorporate benching. If you really love to do it and you want to do it, you want it to be your main pressing exercise, you can do it twice a week, though that probably is a little unnecessary. And if you are going to do it, I like to do a top set, drop set method with most strength exercises a lot of the time. So we'll build up to a heavy top set. Maybe it's 1 to 5 reps and then drop it down for drop sets anywhere from 3 to 10 reps, depending on what you're doing. But I think it's most important to make sure that you're just putting this on the right day. So obviously if you've got a heavy snatch or a heavy clean and jerk on Friday, you probably don't want to do a high volume or really heavy bench press day on Thursday. But it's just switch the days around. Just put it after, right? Because at the end of the day, the weightlifting stuff is the most important thing if that's what you're training for. So just put the bench press after the day after your most important days of the week, and that's usually a good way to do it. And on our 5-day weightlifting split, we have those kind of days aligned for people to fill in their own stuff if they want to. So we say it's called a skills and strength day, where you're going to do one light Olympic lift. Could be a good way to get that mobility feeling a little bit better before you go into your strength work and sub either the push press or the strict press out for the bench press. And most of the time I'll say sub the strict press out for the bench press, because the push press still has a lot of like technique carryover to the jerk too. So that's how I would recommend doing that. Now, bench pressing isn't just something that you do because you like it. It's actually got benefits for weightlifters. What are those benefits?
Yeah, so specifically, there's a few types of people that would really benefit from including the bench press. Uh, First one that comes to mind is someone who just really lacks kind of upper body strength relative to their lower body strength. So it's funny, we talk about sometimes, used to see in weightlifting these guys with gigantic strict presses, just absolutely massive boulder shoulders. Back when they used to have like the clean and press in the 1960s as one of the movements that they competed in for weightlifting. There's been a big shift away from that almost to like the complete other side, where people are just super lower body strong, but you got guys, jerking, 180 kilos, but they can barely strict press 85. It's kind of a crazy divide. So, it's one thing, maybe you don't need that strength, but surplus strength is always helpful. It's always going to give you a little extra edge on somebody who has to rely on their technique and only their technique. So somebody else that might benefit from this, usually on average, women are kind of more distributed with lower body strength relative to their upper body. So I think that's a good thing to include for a lot of female athletes. Or lifters looking to go up in a weight class. Putting on more mass is hard. You need to have a lot of stimulus. So bench press is a good way, a good compound movement to, if you're not training in that plane of motion, adding it in could just help you gain weight easily, produce that hormonal effect to make you eat more and just put on some more muscle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say also, if you have really solid technique, but you consistently miss snatches behind, I found that having some bench press into your training most of the time will help just build up a little bit more muscle and strength and stability in the bottom of that snatch. Now, it's not the cause of instability in the snatch because you're not bench pressing. That's not the number one cause of it. Largely, it's still going to be bar path, but if you do consistently have great bar path and just lose lifts behind, adding in some bench press could be a good thing for you to try as well. Anything that you want to add to bench pressing for weightlifters?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple. Just don't overdo it, and you'll be fine adding it in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Up next, we discuss the slide versus stomp debate. But first, a quick word from Calvin.
Hey guys, quick interruption to the video to tell you about my 12-week weightlifting program. This program is something I put a lot of time and effort into, so be sure to go check it out. The program takes you through a few weeks of volume, strength phase, and then finally ends off with a peaking phase, ending out the program. It comes with a demo video showing you how the program works, how to use it, as well as exercise videos for all the complexes that are used throughout the program. Be sure to go check it out down below. And let's get back into the video.
All right, question number 3. Should you stomp your feet or slide your feet out in the snatch and clean? This is kind of it seems like always been a debate as long as I've been doing weightlifting. Where are these two types of styles taught?
Well, typically you see Asian countries, or specifically like China, is big on the foot slide. They say that's Chinese weightlifting technique, to slide the feet. Whereas European, or specifically like Russia, is the technique of the feet stomp, the big pickup and slam back down into the platform.
Mm-hmm. And each one's kind of got their own benefits. So with China, they usually talk about sliding the feet out because there's no need to have wasted time at the top of the pull when you could be moving under. And I think I understand the argument. I prefer to be a little bit more on the European side with most athletes. Some athletes, I'll actually have them change their focus up. But I prefer to do the stomp. It's something you have to be careful with, and it can be overdone. So to clarify, a stomp does not mean a donkey kick, right? That means that we shouldn't be picking up the foot, bending the knee so that the toes kind of come back behind the knee, and then kicking forward and down. That not going to be all that helpful for you. That's some wasted time there. It can kind of screw up your leg drive as well. But as long as you are finishing your extension and then you pick your feet up and put them down forcefully so that you have a whole foot crack into the floor, I usually like that because for me and for a lot of my lifters, it seems like it does this kickstart into a full body punch. Where people talk about punch, they think about it as just an upper body thing. I think about it as the moment that my feet hit the ground, my entire body is punching up and resisting downward movement of the bar. So I like the stomp because it seems to kind of really kickstart that. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, for sure. Let's go back to like physics class. That might have been a lot of years ago for you, Brian. Me too, honestly. Although I did just take a biomechanics class last year. One of the things we covered was Newton's laws, and so Newton's third law is that every action has equal and opposite reaction. So thinking about like if you are forcefully moving your knee up, and like let's just like consider your body and the bar, everything's like one system together, right? If you're forcefully moving your knee up, the opposite reaction is going to be that your body moves down slightly faster because the system's all controlled for. And so that's one way to think of it, like a real sciencey perspective of it, is that you can probably get under the bar faster if you're picking up your knees like in that way. The other way that I like to think about it, and that makes a little more sense in my head, is that like think about when you're running. Like I did distance running for a long time. A common piece of advice is when you're getting tired, when your legs are feeling tired, start pumping your arms harder. And it kind of has that effect where everything in your body is connected a little bit. And so if you're pumping your arms harder, your legs kind of naturally start to pick up their pace. They start to go a little harder too, without even necessarily telling your legs to do that. So I think it's very similar in the snatch or the clean, whereas the entire body is a system. If you want to be really fast and aggressive in your upper body turnover, being really like lazy and like low motion with your lower body is probably not the best way to do that. Being like aggressive with that lower body is probably going to lead to more aggression in the turnover as well. Now, this is one of those technique aspects. We see lifters that are so successful with both. We see people winning world medals, winning Olympic medals with both techniques. So it clearly doesn't make that much of a difference, whether or not, whichever one you're doing. So there might be some, kind of favored technique towards whatever a lifter is most comfortable with. Although I usually try and get people to split their feet a little more aggressively, while maybe it's not super comfortable for them. It's usually something we're working on, as long as there's nothing else glaring in their movements.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say generally athletes like focus on one, pick one, stick with it for a little while, see if that really supports you. But more importantly, just ask your coach which one you should be doing. All right, we're going to go ahead and move into our next segment here, overrated, underrated. Before we move into our last one, a new segment, so stay tuned for that. Overrated, underrated here, we're going to give each other one topic, and we have to kind of argue whether we think that is overrated or underrated. So I'm going to give you one here, and that is the press-out rule. I'm curious to know your thoughts.
So if I said overrated, that would mean like I want to get rid of it, I guess?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, I'd say honestly, I don't think the press out rule should exist or be enforced in the way that it is. I think if you can put it overhead, it should probably count. I don't know. That's just how I feel. I mean, I think that would change the entire sport and how we think of technique and how we practice. But at the end of the day, the most efficient technique isn't going to be pressing out something. It's always going to be, a smooth turnover. where you're not, losing any tension like that. So I think we'd still see people striving for the same technique, but maybe not being as hypercritical, maybe still going up even if there's a press out, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I cannot stand the press out rule. I think weightlifting is one of the coolest sports because it's so objective. If you lift more weight, you are stronger, you win. I love that. Adding in this subjective rule of, oh, did the elbow bend a little bit? Oh, I think we should take the lift away because of that. I think it makes no sense. I kind of feel the same way about the elbow tap rule. I think just let's let people lift weight and not have to worry about some subjective rule that doesn't make it any easier to lift with more weight. Like if you pull off a heavier clean and jerk and you press out, it is, to me, more impressive that you were able to fight through that whole lift than if you caught it perfectly. So I'm anti press out rule. You heard it here first. We should kick out the press out. All right, what do you got for me?
My overrated, underrated is going to be beltless training. Somebody's like, "Oh, I'm not using my belt for a month."
I think overrated. Maybe it's just the gym that I train at and the gyms that I've been to, but everybody seems really excited about their beltless lifts. And I don't really understand why. It's almost never a stronger lift. So like it's never, I don't know, your beltless PR, I don't think really anybody cares. Like just lift more weight and put a belt on. That is exactly how I feel about it. Now I will say like doing beltless training is probably good, especially if you over rely on your belt, but largely I don't think it's all that necessary. I don't know. I think belts are underrated, at least in the area that I'm in. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's definitely you should train beltless like for a portion of the year. Like I mean, if you're doing volume work, you're doing squats at 65%. Like if you need a belt, you probably need to reevaluate. Kind of your reliance on equipment. Same thing with knee sleeves. But any sort of like, macho man, like, oh, I'm better because I did this beltless, like that's just stupid. Or like posting like a beltless PR, like.
Okay, so we're gonna go into this last section, and wanted to try something new here because I want to try and showcase and shout out more lifters in weightlifting that maybe don't get, maybe they just don't get a lot of press, or they're up and coming lifters, or they just did something that I thought was cool. So we're gonna go ahead and shout out 4 lifters here today. So the first one that I wanted to shout out is one of my athletes we train in person, Lauren Crumbs. So she just hit a 53 kilo snatch as a youth weightlifter, which is awesome. But the thing that is really exciting about it is that it was a 15 pound or 7 kilo snatch PR. But even more impressive is that she's kind of been stuck at the 100-pound mark with a mental block. And just like the moment we try anything more than that, it forget how to snatch completely. So it's been a hard fight to get past that mental barrier. And it's frankly just been lots of volume and reps. But yesterday she hit 3 successive PRs. So it was pretty impressive. I want to shout her out. Who do you got?
Absolutely. My first one is going to be Bryson Brown. So his coach sent over this lift to me, as well as he posted it, I think, on his Instagram. Now Bryson, as little as a year ago, was competing in the 61 category. I know he had to go up at nationals to 67 because he just didn't want to make the cut. But as a 67 lifter, hitting a 305-pound clean and jerk, which is
138 kilos.
Yeah, 138 kilos there. Now, that's impressive enough as itself, but the ease at which he did it with was really the coolest part for me. He's building some good technique. He wasn't always a very good technician, and so I'm seeing him just from knowing his coach and knowing his gym. Seeing him make so much progress lately is really cool. So good job to him.
He's been putting in the work, and I think after the nightmare that was, I think their youth Pan Ams or something, where he made the team but was not able to compete for some like stupid stuff. I think this man is on a vengeance. He is on a comeback tour. I'll be excited to see what he hits. All right, so the next person that I wanted to shout out, he is a Team USA lifter. He's fantastic. George Upmeyer. You guys might have seen this video of his 178 kilo clean and jerk attempt. Listen, it was not a successful lift, but the man fought for this clean and jerk harder than I've ever seen anybody fight for a jerk in my life. It was incredible. And this video's taken off now. It's at like 230,000 views on TikTok. Yeah, I just got to shout this out because this is one of the craziest attempts I've ever seen. Nobody wanted that jerk more than him. It was incredible.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was actually there in the ballroom venue when that happened, but I wasn't paying attention. I was watching the other platform.
Oh man, you missed a moment right there. All right, so who's your last lifter that you're gonna shout out?
So my last lifter is going to be someone else that competed at the Arnold. It's going to be Tyler Cho. So he's been working with me as my athlete for over a year now, well over a year. And this was his first national meet, competing at University Nationals. Now, I will say, one of the reasons his performance is a little more impressive is he was a little forgetful on comp day. So he forgot his singlet, and Brian, you helped him out. You had an extra singlet that you were able to give him to weigh in and lift in. So
he came in clutch. It was good. It was good.
Yeah, and after cutting some weight too, I think he had about a kilo to cut like the day of. I was like, oh boy, I don't know if this is gonna turn out well. He came back and had a great session, making his opener and then making his second at 106 kilos. So that's not too far off his PR snatch. And he had a close attempt at, was it 111 or 112 after
I think it was 112 for a PR.
Yeah, and so then he came out in the clean and jerks, 120 and 125, looking great. That's just 5 kilos off his PR as well. Your first national meet is really, I think, scary. So I like the composure he had, especially with the other adversity of weight cutting and singlet forgetting. That impressed me. I was proud of him.
It was good. I'm gonna have to go in and add in another lifter. I'm sorry. I know that we planned for 4, but I got to shout out Will Fontaine. He's on the FSU team, and he went out, was looking super great on all of his snatch warm-ups. He goes out, makes his first attempt, and he's like, "Hey, I just heard like a snap in my elbow," and he was like, "I'm gonna feel it out." Like, just did a couple with the bar, just felt it out. He's like, "I think I can keep going. I doesn't really hurt. It's just I felt that." Missed his second 2 snatches, but definitely in his head about the elbow. And then he feels fine on clean and jerks. We decided to just go ahead and treat it and compete. And as long as it didn't bother him, then we were going to be okay. And so he made his final clean and jerk. I think he made all 3 or missed his second. I can't quite remember. But on his third clean and jerk, he went up, he smoked a PR and did that to win the session, which is always cool. And we found out afterwards that he had tore his UCL in his elbow, which kind of sucks. Unfortunately, not much you can really do about that because he didn't do anything wrong. Just happens. But to tear a UCL and then go and still smoke a lifetime PR clean and jerk and win the session, it's pretty baller. So shout out Will. That was awesome. Proud of you. Did you want to add a 6th lifter in here that we're going to shout out?
You know what? While we're at it, I'll throw in my buddy, James Tice. He had a great meet. It was his last meet with University Nationals, his 4th University Nationals. He had a really big attempt at a 190 clean and jerk, and we saw a few tears shed on the platform, which was, really heartwarming to see. So that was just like a cool moment to see him finish out his career. He still won. He won again. So it's great to see him being successful, as I know he works really hard.
That's awesome. All right, guys, if you want us to take a look at your lifts, feel free to just tag us on Instagram, Big Ben Strength, or you can post them in our Discord group. But tag us in your lifts. We want to see them. We'll shout you out if we like you on the next episode. All right, guys, where can people find you, Calvin?
At Calvin Lackey 81 kg.
And you guys can find me at Big Ben Strength. We will catch you guys next week. Bye.